So now I'd like to add something to this that is not taught in psychology classes or not taught in Maslow theory. And that is that there is a need that Maslow overlooked. There's a chapter in one of my books titled What Maslow Overlooked that describes this. I think I've published it on the internet in a few places. And the reason why I think he overlooked it is because he himself, being more farmer than hunter, didn't explicitly acknowledge it as a separate need because he felt that it was constantly fulfilled. And that's the need to experience one's own aliveness. I would suggest to you that this need to know that you're alive is right here, below the social needs and above safety. It might even be here, below safety and above physiology. In fact, actually, this is more likely when it's really severe. Here's the question. Why is it that an ADHD child will engage in risky behavior? Why is it that ADHD kids are more likely to engage, whether it's sexually or experimenting with drugs, or whether it's joining a gang or whatever it may be? Why are they more likely to engage in risky behavior? Well, if there is a need to be alive, let's put it right here too. Why would somebody challenge safety? In fact, let's actually move the whole thing down there. Well, that need to be alive, how do we know that we're alive? The way that we know that we're alive is through our senses. There's a part of the brain called the thalamus, way back there, and the small kind of almost a walnut-shaped thing. And the nerves, all of the sensory nerves, except from the olfactory bulb, except the sense of smell, which is unmediated, which is why if you walk into certain environments, like my father had 20,000 books, and my grandmother owned an antique store and had probably another 20,000 books. And whenever I walk into a library, I'm 6 years old again. I mean, it's just the smell, boom, I'm right there. And so the sense of smell is not mediated by the thalamus. But from the eyes, it goes into the thalamus. From the ears, it goes into the thalamus. From our sense of balance, the vestibular system, goes into the thalamus. The sense of touch and several of the different senses of touches go into the thalamus. So basically we have all of our sensory inputs, except for smell, and our taste buds go into the thalamus. And then they radiate out from the thalamus into the rest of the brain via some of the fastest nerves in the brain here. And the thalamus in some ways could be considered, I mean, for purposes of this argument, speak to a neurophysiologist or a neurologist and you'll get it, but this is a gross oversimplification, and yet there's a lot of accuracy to it. You could think of the thalamus as a volume control that is defined genetically. And one of the mechanisms that can change that volume control is dopamine. So here we are on the spectrum, and if you were to, we're all familiar with sensory deprivation tanks, where you lay in a tank and you can't see anything, you can't hear anything, you can't feel anything. People immediately go into dream states and things like that. Some people actually can't handle it, many people. But there's a point at which there's not enough sensory input to tell you that you're alive. I mean, how do we know that we're alive? We know that we're alive because we're seeing what we're seeing, we're hearing what we're hearing, we're feeling what we're feeling. I mean, we're present. Oh, I'm alive. So what if there's this threshold? To arbitrarily put it here, on the spectrum of sensory input, of volume control of the thalamus. And if you were born with your thalamic gain here as your normal set point, then you never doubt whether or not you're alive, because as you're going through your life, your thalamic gain will vary depending on circumstances and conditions and environment and pharmaceuticals and whatnot, but it's pretty much always, the question of am I alive never becomes a serious question. And that's true of most people. But for somebody, particularly the hyperactive variant of ADHD, for somebody who's born with their thalamic gains set here, or even worse, way down here, little Johnny is sitting in his classroom, and his teacher is droning on, and his mind, keep in mind, if we posit this as a need, right? Everything below this point, these are absolute needs. These are luxuries to survive as a human. These are needs to survive as a human. So, anyway, I'm not sure what to do about that. So little Johnny is sitting in his classroom. Don't let ADD adults near your. We should raise this thing. So little Johnny is sitting in his classroom, and the teacher's droning on, and he's feeling the back of his brain, his deep mental processes are saying, "You're not alive. You're not alive. Danger, danger," right? Because he's not experiencing aliveness. There's not enough sensory input. So he reaches out and grabs little Sally's ponytail sitting in the chair in front of him and pulls on it. And she goes, "Ah!" And everybody in the class looks at him, and the teacher glares at him, and all of a sudden he gets a little adrenaline rush, and that kicks up his sensory input because adrenaline does turn up the thalamus, and suddenly, it turns up our entire metabolism, and suddenly he's above the threshold, and he goes, "Ah, I'm alive." The teacher's coming at him, right? "Oh, I'm alive, I don't care, it's worth the price." And then he pays the price, and 15, 20 minutes goes by, or, for some kids it's actually, well, in this case, 15 or 20 minutes goes by, and his neurology settles back down again, and oh my goodness, I'm not alive, I'm not alive, I'm not alive, what am I going to do? And so he wads up a little piece of paper and gets it all wet, and he throws a spitball at Billy over there, and Billy goes, "Oh, what's that?" And suddenly, and it starts all over again, right? And of course, boom, he pops up above this. And these periodic eruptions above this threshold are what we call hyperactive outbursts, right? These are the hyperactive moments, or what we might call, in some adults and in other circumstances, the moments when people make just terrible, terrible decisions. When they decide to engage in risky behavior that's genuinely risky and they probably shouldn't be doing. Let's try this drug. Let's have unprotected sex. Those kinds of things could be coming out of these. What we see very often, the presentation of ADHD in girls, is that they are interrupting absolutely as much as the boys are. It's just that the boys are interrupting in visible external ways. They're making jokes. They're interrupting people's conversations. They're throwing the spitballs. They're doing whatever. They're interrupting things in ways that are externalized. The girls are interrupting in ways that are internalized. They're having conversations inside their own heads about something, or something that is said leads them off on some other journey, and then 4 minutes later they suddenly remember, "Oh, I'm supposed to be paying attention and listening," and now they're brought back. Oh, and this is the classic presentation of ADHD in girls, and it's very often described in disparaging terms as the dumb blonde jokes in American society, and I don't know the equivalent here since so many Swedes are blonde. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's dumb brunettes. I don't know, but they're described as being inattentive or as not being so smart or not really caring, when really they may care a lot and they may be brilliant. But they're easily distracted by their own internal dialogue. They're easily distracted, and that distraction leads to internal dialogue rather than external dialogue. And because it's not happening on the outside, it's only happening on the inside, nobody notices. Because nobody notices, nobody intervenes. And then you end up with somebody 20, 30, 40 years old who has had a lifetime of challenges that could have been, their life could have been much easier if somebody had intervened much earlier. Or, for that matter, even at the age of 30, 40, 50, 60, with that self-awareness, now here's an opportunity to challenge it, to look for ways to bring more stimulation into life, to look for learning environments and teaching environments that are more interesting, to find relationships that are interesting and not just romantic relationships, friend relationships, business relationships, all the various things that men and women both go through. And so this unique presentation of ADHD in girls, I find to be so rarely discussed, and given that women and girls are half our population, really important. I mean, even if they were only a small percentage, it would be really important. But we're talking about massive underdiagnosis or under-reporting or under response as a consequence of this, as a consequence of this acculturation. And so I think it's a really important thing that acculturation be acknowledged. Now, for some kids who are born way down here, you see these eruptions every 5, 10, 15 minutes. For some kids who are born with their thalamic gain right here, or let's say right here, you might see them go through most of their lives, and then they kind of wander into here, and maybe once every 3 or 4 years, they will do something that pops them back up there. And so you see people, and I'm guessing I'm more in that position because I basically have reinvented my life every 5 or 6 years. Louise and I, when we were first married back almost 40 years ago, made the decision that we weren't going to retire when we got old. We were going to retire throughout our lives. We were going to enjoy life while we were young. And we've built 7 businesses. One of them, the children's program, we made no money from. It's a nonprofit, but we've built 6 for-profit businesses and sold them and retired in each case and taken a year or 2 or 3 years off. And 1 year we lived in Germany and traveled all around Europe and other circumstances. And for some of our kids that's been great fun, and for some it's like, why is mom and dad always, But I think that there's an explanation here, and I think with this need to be alive, this need right here, or maybe even here, to fundamentally know that you are alive. The main 2 things that this tells us, if there is truth to this hypothesis, and I believe not only is there proof, but it's demonstrable, is that, first of all, Johnny pulling on Susie's ponytail is not a moral decision. It's a survival decision. Now, it is, we can argue morality, but historically, prior to the 60s and 70s with the diagnosis of hyperactivity and hyperkinesis, these children were simply considered bad kids. And even today, many people regard them as bad children, as being morally deficient. And if you look at it in this context, you get it. This has nothing to do with morality. That's going to be shaded by circumstances of growing up and birth and value systems and what they, from their culture, from their parents, from their religion, from their society as a whole, all those things. But that this is not an issue of good or wrong, bad, right or wrong. It's an issue of needing to be alive. And the second and perhaps most dramatic thing that this tells us is that if we can artificially grab little Johnny's thalamic gain, his pumping into the reticular activating system, his level of aliveness, and drag it up above this line and set it right here with, for example, 10 milligrams of Ritalin, or in the case of Sherlock Holmes, a 7% solution of cocaine, then he's going to be sitting there in the class going, wow, I'm fully alive. I can see what I can see, I can hear what I can hear, I can feel what I can feel. There's no doubt in my mind I'm alive. And once that need for aliveness is met, the dysfunctional or abreactional behaviors, the dysfunction is probably the best word, behaviors that people engage in, particularly children, to stimulate themselves or to rattle their environment so that their environment will stimulate them, to cause them to feel that they're alive, to kick up their dopamine levels, to kick up their, and all the associated neurochemicals and hormones from adrenaline on down. Those behaviors go away because they're not necessary anymore. It also explains why first of all, it also explains why not all kids, why it's so important if you're going to use stimulant medication. And I'm not a big fan of stimulant medication, and I'll explain what I would do as an alternative. But I do recognize that there are many kids who you actually have to, you've got to do this. You know, those who were born way down here, there may be fewer than 1% of classrooms in Sweden that are sufficiently high in levels of stimulation that they're going to keep that kid above this threshold. So, you know, a little bit of help from their friends, right? As adults, the way that the ADHD adults do this is typically with caffeine. Self-stimulation, self-medication. But what is it doing? It's raising the levels of arousal, which is making, I'm alive, I'm aware, I'm awake. So number one, it tells us that titration is really important because really all we need to do is get them just above that threshold. And then teach them this, because if we can get them just above that threshold, then they're paying attention. And we can teach them living and coping skills that they can continue to carry on when they're not in a medicated state, when they're below that threshold. We can teach them how to self-stimulate, for example.